I think education is an important one. And there's a particular issue with this. So for an industry that is really evolving so quickly, how could you train people to teach others when the time it takes to educate to the right level, by doing so, it would be out of date and there hasn't been time to do it in the first place, to then teach people on the scale required to be up to date to compete. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if it's 2 years old, but it takes 3 years to train someone, to train people for 4 years, but you can only begin on what is true today, then the latency is so huge. Who's training who? And of course, whose responsibility is education? And if it's so deeply ingrained into the economy, which it now is, and the future, then it also leads into a highly politically charged environment, because then you're talking defense, you're talking, the scale is immense. So it's a catch-22 problem, and that there has to be more innovative ways to look at this.
So keeping on the education theme, not just about educating adults and technologists, but what about schools and universities? How do you see AI changing the way we teach and children learn, really? Because you've had a couple of educators on the podcast, right?
Well, two sides to that. One, the potential is incredible, but again, the initial potential leads to consequences which are potentially highly negative. And that's the problem in and around. If you can ask a question and immediately get an answer, well, the value of education is actually the journey that you take between the question and the answer, so that you understand why the answer is correct or incorrect, how you construct it, how you critically think, how you really understand, you research, you learn, you become enriched and armed at being able to do that on a repeat basis. If people are using some of the popular LLMs to do everything, then you have a huge amount of people that think they've been educated. They can answer specific questions, potentially correct. They can answer tests, but what do they know? I mean, one of my favorite videos ever was Richard Feynman talking about his dad taking him around the woods and showing him all the birds, saying something like, "Well, what's this? It's a sparrow. What's that in Spanish? And what's it in Japanese? And what's this bird?" And at the end, his dad said to him, "Son, what have you learned about the birds?" He says, "Oh, I know everything about the birds now." He says, "You know nothing. All you know is how humans make sounds in different languages representing what they call it. But you don't know its anatomy, you don't know anything about the birds, you know the labels." That's the exact same risk that we have and is being seen with education. And it's a tough one, because there is so much power in doing something fantastic with education from a psychological standpoint, really understanding how people tick, how they listen, how they learn, how they improve, what is a potentially good way to communicate with someone, how coaches can work with all the players and understand how to get the best out of them, how they can get the best out of themselves. That's a component part of teaching. If one teacher teaches a whole class the same way, and 50% learn in one way, 50% learn another, does that mean you've got 50% bad students, or is it 50% bad teacher? So the idea that you can have personalized education tailored to giving optimal value both from the teacher and to the student is fantastic. But that's countered with potential laziness and Dunning-Kruger effect, which it'll be very hard for young people if they're only given one way of being taught. How can it be their fault? How does that help them? So it's not a blame game, but we have to understand, what does it mean?